Does it go way back?
No, it's.
Go way back.
That's
that? No, I have, because I want to go
And
back
then,
and read.
.org. And then it tells you can.
Because I know a family
It
that
doesn't
was one of
cost
the
it's
founders
not a
there.
thing.
They were Dutch
I
people.
mean, they always want you to donate, but you can create an account
Yeah,
and it gives you
interesting.
all sorts of.
What I found.
And then.
On one side.
The Torah portion.
Honestly, it's also going to be modern.
Yes.
It is what it
So
is.
here's,
Yeah, this is the Torah portion of the week, so it just.
we have some friends online with us for Torah Study. We're not able to see you, friends, although, wait, I'm just gonna use the video that shows you me. Let's see.
And then there's,
So now
Turn
you're
on
gonna
the
see
power. What happens?
different
what PowerPoint
translations you can get if you want, but yeah,
this
so
is
I
on.
just made a
Is
screenshot,
it getting power?
screenshots of it,
Yeah,
and turned it into a
it's
PDF because, again, I want to.
Because this is
build
still
right on
showing
it.
red, rather than if it's supposed to show green
This,
Hebrew.
it's not involved.
Okay. And then you have.
You have to go look.
Okay.
at-
I mean, it's on.
I'm not gonna
The TV's gonna power.
Sorry.
Not gonna say it doesn't exist.
It's got a green button.
You never know.
What are other inputs?
But I'm learning, I'm learning tropes, so all the little like, not the dots and dashes are the, something like this part here are the vowels, but like that trope, that trope, that's the trope symbol, and it tells you the tune. So when Paula chants the first,
But it came.
always chants like the first.
Okay, I don't wanna waste any more time.
The first
Dealing with this,
verse.
I can see you,
She's-
you can see me, and you can hear everybody chatter, yes?
I can see you.
Sound is coming through our owl. Here comes Faith to join us.
So this one, she does it. It's really fun.
In the second
I've been learning it.
Parasha, yes, we need the doors closed.
I love
Of the book
I
of
still
Acts.
have to learn how to. I wanted.
Laura says she's gonna start me on Haftorah tropes soon. I'm like, not yet.
It might be part of our course too.
Oh,
Right?
I don't know.
I think it's just sort of said.
That's coming fun.
It might be, we can
Cool.
ask.
All right, friends.
Started
Gonna make that-
Haftorah.
That's-
But anyway, he was.
Shabbat shalom, can't you?
Better on the lesson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Ron.
I'm glad somebody can hear me.
How is Muriel?
Oh, she's not that well. She's been sick for quite a while.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Please tell her we send our best.
I will do that. Thank you. Shabbat shalom to you too. And how are you doing? And how is your wonderful husband doing?
Yes, hanging in there. So our Torah portion this week is called VAERA. Everybody has it in the book. The page is
420.
420. I will chant the first verse and then we'll get into reading our portion this week. Vayedaber Elohim el Moshe, Vayomer elav ani Adonai. That is to say, and God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Adonai. I'm applying the notes to the right
Nicely
word
done.
in English as well. Some congregations do, which is interesting. So this is really interesting because we talk a lot about what's God's name and how do the different patriarchs and biblical characters know God. And we had the revelation to Moses of the Yud He Vav He name. And here God is explaining God's self in verse 3, chapter, saying, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them but by my name, Yud He Vav He, we say Adonai, because God's name is unpronounceable, as we know it. And then also God continues, I also established my covenant with them.
And then he called.
And then God called. I got in the door, came and explained everything. At verse 4, I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. We kind of had a little bit of this before, right? And the curiosity is, how could God forget? You know, what's with the remembering and forgetting? This is God we're talking about. This is omnipotent God.
Can I ask, the mezuzah, I think, is that what is supposed to, or does appear from the parchment inside is El Shaddai? Are those the words that?
Well, it has the Shema in it,
Yeah,
but when it's rolled up, there's usually a little, three little letters. The Shin Daled Yud, the Shaddai
okay.
part. And the Shin that you see on the outside sometimes of a mezuzah also,
Oh,
picking that, because it can be an acronym, the Shomer Dalet Yisrael, the guardian of the doors of Israel. Right, as we hear from the Passover story too, you know, the sweeping of blood
Yeah.
on the doorposts, the mezuzah kind of
yeah.
can represent that as well, right? We're putting a sign on our doorposts. Yeah, interesting, right? This new aspect of God that Moses is getting to know and going to apply. You know, up to now, the story of the Jewish people have been through individual patriarchs, right? And their families. And this will expand in Israel, you know, so it's not surprising that God is thought of as the guardian of their doors. Now, God is becoming for a whole community. We're going to build the community of the Jewish people through our wanderings, right? So this is a new kind of concept, right? God, the source of all. Okay. So we're at verse 6. David, would you like to read?
Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am the Lord. I will free you from the burdens of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisement.
We hear some of this language, bits of these verses in our Passover Haggadah. So when you are having a Passover Seder this year, and pay attention to that little bit and say, yes, I heard that in VAERA, and it comes right out of the Torah.
And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I, the Lord. But when Moses told us this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses. Their spirits crushed by cruel bondage.
Let's stop for a minute and think about that. The state of the Israelites in Egypt. You know, over the years they've been forced into labor. They have a really different reality than they would have had with Joseph when the Israelites came to Egypt. They've been crying out in their pain and in their suffering to their God, and now a Messiah, in essence, comes to them and says, okay, it's all going to be solved. You know, God is coming to let you out. But people's reaction is disbelief, right? Can you relate to that? Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know, like I want to hope myself, like,
I think it's hard to trust Adonai. I mean, you know, it takes a minute. You know what I mean? Like,
well, they've
it's not
never,
like, you know, everyone
never
is
seen
like,
him.
oh, yeah, you know, I don't know. So I
Yeah.
can totally see that, like, especially if you're going through a whole lot of stuff. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
really?
Well, and it's Moses, right, saying, hey, I've been told,
Yeah,
right, that this
why
is
should we believe you?
right,
Right?
right.
Maybe you're crazy.
Mhm.
What, a bush?
You're
Burning?
Yeah,
What do you mean? I don't
what?
understand. What? A what now?
Right. I know so many people that have, you know, difficult, challenging things have happened to them. And the response is, how can there be a God? There
Mhm.
must not be a God, you know, that lets these bad things happen. So I can see that people in this circumstance, you know, suffering under slavery.
Yeah.
There seems to be no relief in sight. How could there be? How could?
Up to this point too, there was, I guess, nothing written down about their own history, so
Absolutely.
they wouldn't have seen
We don't know what
what they knew about Joseph and.
Yeah.
the prosperous years, right?
Yeah.
I also give a lot of credit to Jewish canon. That I don't know how many other canonical texts for other religions would talk about, here's a miracle about to happen for you. And the response is, nah. I don't think so. And just to show that aspect of human nature.
humanity.
So, whether it's divine or whether it's a historical narrative, I think it's pretty phenomenal that. this
We
sort of
share the
statement.
brokenness along with the miracle.
Yeah.
And that's a theme all through, Jewish life.
Holding joy,
People were
holding
able to
joy
hold-
and sorrow in the same vessel.
Right.
And remember what our name,
tablets with
Israel,
all
right,
this
to wrestle with
to
God,
wrestle
so
with
it's
God.
right in our name to go, really though?
Yeah,
Yeah.
a
Yeah, sure
very
do.
unique phenomenon
Yeah.
that we hold.
Yeah.
Let's continue. Thank you.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying,
We're 20.
Go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from his land. But Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, The Israelites will not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me, a man of impeded speech?
Yeah, Moses saying, Aral Sephatayim. I have tied up or bound lips.
And we remember why?
There's a midrash, not from the Torah,
Yeah.
but tell us the story. So there's of
go,
course, the
David.
rabbis
Why-
wonder, why
why-
did he have trouble speaking?
Why Moses stutters?
Yeah, why did Moses stutter? And so there's a midrash, a story of rabbinic imagination that fills that gap.
Yeah,
Tell
but
us, David.
somebody, I forget exactly the context, but a precious jewel or something, similar to this at the baby's feet, who reached for it, but it was determined that it wouldn't be a very appropriate thing to put in his mouth, and it was changed magically into a hot coal and burned his tongue.
Oh, wow.
I think that's
So I
what
heard
it
it
was, wasn't it?
a slight twist on that, which is, Pharaoh's concern, like, my daughter brought this Jewish baby up out of the Nile, like, my concern is that the Jews will usurp us or will fight against us. So let's test this baby out and see, if this baby is someone that's going to do that. Placed a gem and a hot coal in front of the
yes.
baby.
Oh, and the baby.
The baby crawls towards it, and most babies, like the sparkly thing is gonna be the one that catches the eye, and then God diverts the baby, so it shouldn't be become a victim of Pharaoh at that time, and the baby gets burnt from the coal.
That's
We
right.
can all add to the story. That's good storytelling, right?
It's Oral Sephatayim literally means uncircumcised.
Yeah.
That's
What word?
uncircumcised,
What's the word that?
oral.
Well, not
Aura?
Aral.
Oh,
Aral.
Oh,
Mhm.
lips with a foreskin.
When you think of cleft lips or when you can have that piece of skin that comes down. Cleft palate. So maybe something like that, right? Something that was not
You would have thought,
extra skin.
you would have thought his mother might have sent him for speech therapy.
Used to think, right, back then, Yocheved, what's wrong with Yocheved? Yeah. Yeah, I think she was lucky that she had the Shifra and Pua
Yeah.
midwives to save the day. Okay, so Moses is not just like you'd think that God tells you to do something and you're like so in awe. But here's Moses showing all the doubts, like they're not gonna listen to me. Like, why do you I'm not a leader, maybe, or I don't speak very well. There's such imposter syndrome, to use that word that we use all the time now, right? That he's not feeling like he is the one to do this.
and isn't Moses also known as one of the reasons he was chosen, I read somewhere, is because of his enormous humility. And he's showing that even now, even before God. I think you've made a mistake. It can't be me.
I know, isn't it great when technology doesn't, it's like, it's not enough that I have to do this, but now.
But now, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that was like
But
my
thank you.
equivalent of taking a sledgehammer and.
So
Not-
if he's saying it's so if it's an uncircumcised tongue, another way to look at that is, he doesn't know how to sort of bite his tongue. He does not hold stuff.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Maybe he
Interesting.
can't.
Well,
he
bite your
can't
tongue,
control what he's saying, and that's
Oh.
what it is. I don't know.
Nice interpretation. I like that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we'll continue with verse 13. Are you?
Yes. So the Lord spoke to both Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt.
So notice God's solution is, I'll bring in your brother. You'll have that support. He speaks okay. We'll get this job done.
From the names.
Okay, names.
The following are the heads of their respective clans. Apologies in advance. The sons of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, Enoch and Palu, Hezron and Carmi. Those are the families of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, Jamil, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zoher, and Saul, the son of a Canaanite woman. Those are the families of Simeon.
Notice that there's a remark there about the maternal line, not being an Israelite in that family.
These are the names of Levi's son by their lineage: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the span of Levi's life was 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni, and Shimei by their families. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Ishar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And the span of Kohath's life was 133 years. The sons of Merari, Mahli, and Mushi. These are the families of the Levites by their lineage. Amram took to wife his father's sister, Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the span of Amram's life was 137 years.
So the whole point of that genealogy was to show you, where did Moses come from? What family is he? How is he linked to the brothers, right?
Can I ask a question that just hit me right now? So, all the male born children are supposed to be killed. How did Aaron,
Yeah,
is he?
the
old?
law came after.
Okay, so he was older and they were only going
He was
after infant.
grandfathered in.
He was,
as they
so to
say.
speak. Okay, so he's older.
Yes.
Okay.
His grandfather then.
What about he married his aunt?
There, and then there's that.
Right.
And then there's that, but I.
Sorry, but
He took his wife, his father's sister. You have a. Okay.
The sons of Ishar, Korah, Nepheg, and Zichri. The sons of Uzziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Zithri. Aaron took to wife Elishaba, daughter of Amminadab, and sister of Nahshon.
You remember Nachshon, the
Yes.
story, the
Yeah.
Midrash, the first one to step a toe into the water, even though it had not split yet and had faith that it would.
Yes. And she bore him Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar.
But we know that Nadab and Abihu, as the firstborn two sons of Aaron, are the ones that will bring strange fire
Oh,
when they learn to serve in the temple.
and is
right?
that Korah? Like
Yeah.
the Korah?
Yeah,
Okay.
that Korah.
There he
Yeah,
is.
Quite a family.
Yes.
Renowned.
The sons of Korah, Asir, Akanah, and Abiasaph. Those are the families of the Korahites.
I think there should be a medal when people have to read all those names. Muzzle.
Mazel tov.
Yeah.
I'm getting it.
Mhm.
And Aaron's son, Eleazar,
Yeah, yeah.
took to wife one of Putiel's daughters, and she bore him Phineas.
So there's another, a whole book of Torah that will come later, the whole Parasha.
Those are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their families.
You know what, let's transfer the reading now. Very sure, thanks.
Now that all the names, thanks, David.
Exactly.
It is the same Aaron and Moses to whom Adonai said, bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. These are the same, Moses and Aaron. For when Adonai spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and Adonai said to Moses, I am Adonai, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you. Moses appealed to Adonai, saying, see, I get tongue-tied. How then should Pharaoh heed me?
So notice, how the narrative went, right? It got to that point where Moses was saying that same thing. He was tongue-tied. And then we had to go through kind of the history. Where did Moses come from? Who married who? And then back to the story, right? Reminding me of that person. Now we're in chapter 7. Please continue.
Adonai replied to Moses, see, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh with your brother Aaron as your prophet.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's
So
interesting, isn't it?
You're God, he's your prophet. Is that what he's saying?
I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh.
Wow.
So interesting, with your brother Aaron as your prophet. Remember, the Egyptians have many, many gods, right? Gods that are more like people than a god, right?
Well, the
So they have
Pharaoh
limited,
wasn't the Pharaoh God?
like the Egyptian, yeah, Pharaoh's like a god, right? They have limited things they can do, a special area maybe, right? I do
Right.
Like a
water,
special-
fire.
I do
Like the
weather, I
god
do
of.
fire, right? I do building. They need food, right? They need offerings,
Right.
right? This is like, they're like human, right? And so, it's not strange for Pharaoh to see like, oh, if this powerful person can do these things, then I'm meeting a god, right? Do you have anything to add to why that might say there?
Well,
Not to
I
keep
think
up
you
and-
need to consider the relationship on two different levels. So you've got, Moses, the leader of the Israelites, going up against Pharaoh, the leader of the Egyptians. But you've also got Adonai, the God of Israel, going up against Pharaoh, a god of Egypt. And so you've got, and it comes down to, my God can beat up your God. Who's, and especially as Paul said, in an environment, in a polytheistic environment. They have no problem accepting Adonai as a God. It's just.
Right. The
God, the God, the creator God of everything. So.
Okay, let's go on.
I like that idea, that connection of the Israelite God because Pharaoh's a god, and so one against the other.
Yeah.
That's
The
interesting.
battle of the gods.
The battle of God. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt.
It's good that, okay, this is a whole subject. God is the one hardening Pharaoh's heart.
Why would that be?
Yeah, why would that? I mean, God says it right there.
Yeah.
Why? So that the signs and the marvels will be more and multiplied. If just, what's the first plague? Water turning to blood, is that the first one? Yeah. Yeah, a dung, yeah. Dung. Svardea, right. The water turns to blood for 7 days is the first plague. And then Pharaoh says, oh, this is terrible. You can all go. End of story. Right? Not nearly as dramatic to the Egyptian people, right? Who will experience all of these plagues and really know that this God, because remember, by the time Moses gets into the wilderness of the people and meets Yitro, his father-in-law, he's already heard about these miracles that happen. Like the news has got around, right? I don't know how it did back then. It didn't have the internet or anything, but.
And by hardening Pharaoh's heart, he gives Pharaoh a choice, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
So is he gonna do the right thing or not? So it does prolong the story, but it gives Pharaoh he's given a choice.
Right, and we always see Pharaoh kind of battling back and forth with
I
that
don't think,
choice.
doesn't sometimes he say, okay, go ahead, and then he goes, oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Yeah,
never mind,
over
change
and over.
plans,
right?
after, oh, wait a minute, I just thought about it, never mind.
So Pharaoh's really kind of really, like I talked last night,
Yeah.
sermon about the Yetzer Ra and the Yetzer Tov. You know, Pharaoh's really battling that, pulls, which way should I go?
When you get to the plagues, the first number of plagues, I think the first 3 or 4, it says, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And then after the remaining numbers, it says, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Oh, interesting.
So it is in a way a continuation of the drama, because the first number, it was Pharaoh's own internal processing. He changed his mind or whatever. There's a wonderful midrash that says that it was when he finally let the Israelites go. His wife wakes up the next morning and says,
Here's my coffee.
"Where's my?"
What's wrong with you?
You let them go
Did
back
what?
and get them.
Yeah,
But, whatever it was, for the first number, yeah, he changed his own mind. But after that, it really was God pushing that push.
And God also had a reason for the types of plagues as well, because each of the plagues had a significance to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Frogs, I think represented fruitfulness, insects, rebirth. So there was a reason for the types of plagues as well that he.
I read an interesting thing about the frogs. I don't know why it came up this week, but that because it says frog.
Oh, I wrote that in the.
You wrote that. It was so interesting.
Wasn't it interesting?
Yeah,
There's
really
one
interesting.
line when it
One
talks
line.
about the plague, where Sfardea is the Hebrew word for frog, and it always talks about the Sfardim, the frogs that came out. But in one line, when Aaron first holds his rod over, it says a frog comes out, one frog. So the rabbis
It
say
was a huge.
that it was a giant frog. And what happened is the Egyptians started hitting it, and every time they hit it, it broke into little frogs. So their anger
Like Mickey Mouse's
made it.
Wow.
Could have been. Isn't that
That's
interesting?
really powerful.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
to not.
So it's like, they exuded hate and then
Yeah, the
it got
hate made it
worse.
worse, which was
Oh,
the
that's
whole.
really powerful.
Great.
Yeah, that's
midrash.
wild.
Yeah, I love
I like that.
I love it how in modern Hebrew, France, Sepharad.
Oh, right, why? Why?
Well,
Oh,
I
and
mean,
But they're called,
They're
people-
called
they're
French
called
frogs,
French
yeah.
frogs.
That's not
They
great.
call, it's
Yeah.
not nice,
No,
but
it's
that's,
not.
it's
Yeah,
not
no,
nice.
I
It's
mean-
not a nice term, but it's,
Yeah.
the frogs.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I never
I don't
understood, I
whether
don't know why
Hebrew or
though,
English came first.
Oh, right.
but
Yeah, I always wondered about that. Had no idea.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's from it would. I think like-
Frogs legs, I think is a delicacy or something.
They are,
Tastes like chicken.
so they say.
Tastes like
Okay.
chicken.
At verse 3 here,
But we don't.
but I will harden Pharaoh's heart, God is saying, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. And I think it's so wise of God to tell Moses that. So there's a foreshadowing for Moses. Moses realizes that, it's gonna happen differently than I would hope. I would hope, one ask and he'd just say yes, or I would hope that one plague and Pharaoh would change his mind and then I could get the people out, right? But God is saying, no, it's gonna play out differently. It's gonna play out, it's gonna need lots of different signs and lots.
I like it says Aaron as your prophet, so Aaron is doing the talking as a
Yeah.
prophet would.
Right.
The similar.
Wayne, were you gonna add something?
Yes, I wasn't even sure if you could hear me. This phrase has always puzzled me. I will harden Pharaoh's heart. The second part is that I might multiply my signs. So if God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart, then the signs could be multiplied.
Right.
So the other part I thought of, hardening Pharaoh's heart would have to be strengthening of Pharaoh past the degree of humanity that man can't actually bear, because if he sees himself as God,
Right.
God will bring him out of himself way beyond individually, not Egypt, just Pharaoh and God, so that Pharaoh could see who truly is God.
Wow. Yeah, that's very powerful. Thank you, Wayne.
Wayne, I think you're right, but at the same time, I think it begs the question about who's God trying to impress? The Egyptians or the Israelites? And the fact that the number of plagues gets stretched out well beyond where Pharaoh would have given up seems to imply that it's more about impressing the Israelites who already, Moses said, they're not going to listen to me, so they obviously need quite a dramatic display of God's power in order to accept.
Except
Situation.
God says to Moses, I'm doing this deliberately, so it doesn't mean I'm failing. I'm doing it for a purpose.
Right.
And it's been 400 years, right? That they've been in, that since they sort of since the Israelites last saw kind of any miracle of God. And it seems like there were a lot more, I'm here, I'm gonna help you here, I'm gonna take you there, and then nothing. So, you've got generations of people who have no sort of first or even secondhand knowledge of this happening, so.
Is there a midrash that the number of years was reduced, was supposed to be 400, but was dropped to something else, or am I making it up? Somebody is quacking.
You're quacking out.
I mean, they were, from the time Joseph and the family came down. It's 430 years,
Okay.
but 30, which is basically a generation, 30 years of Joseph's leadership and everything, so life was good for them. And then, there rose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph in 400 years, so.
There's no reduction. I don't know where I got that.
There
may
are,
be,
I read a lot about that 2 weeks ago. It can get down to as low as 270 something years based on how they're measuring people's lives. Because all those things that said, and they lived for 130 years and they lived for, so they're like, the rabbis are doing calculations and there is some difference, like some talk about that. Yeah. Okay, let's continue on verse 4. Sherry, you okay reading?
Sure. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Adonai when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst.
And so there's a good sign. God is saying he wants the Egyptians to know that he is the God of the Israelites and he is this powerful to be able to do this.
And Moses and Aaron did as Adonai commanded them, so they did. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they made their demand on Pharaoh. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh speaks to you and says, produce your marvel, you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh. It shall turn into a serpent. So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as Adonai had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent.
So this is before plagues happen, right? This is just demonstrating that God is with us. Then here's the power of God. I throw down my rod, right? And so we'll see how this plays out. It's really interesting.
Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the sages and the sorcerers and the Egyptian magician priests, in turn did the same with their spells. Wah! Each cast down his rod, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. Yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them as Adonai had said. And Adonai said to Moses, Pharaoh is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is coming out to the water, and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turned into a snake.
I think it's funny that it says, make sure you take that rod.
Yeah, the special rod, not the other
rod
one.
that turned into the snake.
The one that turned into a snake. And say to him, Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, let my people go, that they may worship me in the wilderness. But you have paid no heed until now.
I'm just reflecting on these words, let my people go. Many spiritual songs have been written with those words. It's, the iconic statement that we hear. Today in Israel, we saw 4 hostages released, the second phase. 4 female officers, 18, 19,
And 20, I
20.
think. Yeah, 19, 20 or something.
We don't, some people have said, like, why don't we use the term "let my people go" in that case? In other words, you let my people go to Hamas, right? Why don't we use that biblical language? We don't. We use bring them home. So we are not appealing to Hamas to change like we did to Pharaoh. We are saying us bring them home. Right? It's powerful.
There's been
Different message.
discussions about that, about whether that should have been changed, whether it
That
should have
is
been.
so powerful, though, that it is us who must bring them home, rather
Yes.
than expecting them to change.
Exactly.
Whose responsibility it is.
Okay, let's continue. This is really, we're down by the river now.
Down by the river. Thus says Adonai, by this you shall know that I am Adonai. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile with the rod that is in my hand, and it will be turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile will die. The Nile will stink, so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile.
So this is all God talking, right? He's like playing out exactly what will happen. First this, then this, then this.
And that's, I mean, the Nile, that's the lifeline,
That
right?
is the lifeline,
You don't
yes.
have the water from the Nile, you don't have anything
It's
else.
also considered a god.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, right. And Adonai said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and hold out your arm over the waters of Egypt, its rivers, its canals, its ponds, all its bodies of water, that they may turn to blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in the vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as Adonai commanded. He lifted up the rod and struck the water in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and all the water in the Nile was turned to blood, and the fish in the Nile died. The Nile stank so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile, and there was blood throughout the land of Egypt. But when the Egyptian magician priests did the same with their spells, Pharaoh's heart stiffened and he did not heed them, as Adonai had spoken.
So this is our first plague, and the magicians were able to reproduce this. Kind of dumb on their part because they're making it worse.
Right.
That just adds to the
Yeah.
problems the Egyptians are going to have.
Yes. And Pharaoh turned and went into his palace, paying no regard even to this. And all the Egyptians had to dig round about the Nile for drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the Nile. When 7 days had passed after Adonai struck the Nile, Adonai said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Adonai, let my people go, that they may worship me.
So what's unique and different about this first plague, and unlike the plagues that will come, is that it turns off after 7 days. It's not like God said, okay, you can go, I get it, uncle, called uncle, and then it was changed. No, it was a 7-day plan. They got to live with that horror for 7 days, and then the Nile went back to normal. And then now Moses is going to say, let my people go so they will worship me. Okay.
And if you refuse to let them go, then I will plague your whole country with frogs.
Okay, does that just sound funny, or I just wonder how that would have been received? That plague.
The frogs?
Yeah, it doesn't sound scary.
It doesn't, but we don't know, like,
The godness of the frogs.
the
maybe.
goddess of the frogs, or what the frogs could do to, we know what the locusts could do to crops, but what could maybe frogs were a real vermin. They could have been a real
Maybe it's
pest.
symbolic, possibly, it means something. to
Yeah, if it means
Egyptians,
something to the Egyptians,
More than the way we think of it.
Right.
Today, possibly.
I was wondering, because they're green, I know this sounds ridiculous, but when I remember my parents, and I guess it was prejudicial, but when the immigrants came over after the Second World War, they were referred to as greenhorns
oh, that's
or
right.
greenies.
Yeah.
Oh, they're greenies.
Green is
yeah.
like a newbie, like someone who doesn't
Yeah,
know.
a stranger,
Mhm.
a stranger
Interesting.
and different and odd.
Oh, that's
And-
funny. How
and
did
so
that
maybe
happen?
they think the frogs were different and
Different,
odd.
green.
I
And
mean-
when you're green, when someone says, oh, well, he's green, like you're new at
New-
it, right?
Naive.
Well, like, look,
Yeah.
Elphaba is green.
Huh?
Which
And Elphaba is green.
That's
I'm
witch
green.
in
Yeah.
Wicked.
As we shall see.
And Kermit says it's not easy being.
That's
green.
right.
That
It's all
was-
coming
That
together.
was obviously a
That was
biblical
biblical,
reference.
yeah.
For sure, right?
Let's
That
read
green is
on.
not complimentary, so if something green was invading you, they're
Yeah.
strangers, they're greenhorns.
Right,
And in the
right.
States, it's even called a green card, although it's not really green.
It's not green, but they call
The
it.
permanent
Really?
residence, the permanent residency that's
It's not
not
green.
called,
No.
what you get is, they don't, in the States, they don't say, oh, I have my permanent residency, they say, oh, I got my green card. I have my green card, and it's not really green.
So
I mean, there's like
interesting.
some green.
I think
sort of-
anything green is not a positive.
Really?
So the fact that,
It's my favorite color.
I know, no, but not the color,
And
but
gangrene,
things that are
yeah.
green, like the frogs in Quebec,
Right.
that's not a complimentary thing.
Right.
Or the greenhorns. My parents used to say, you have to excuse him, he's a greenie. So,
Huh.
which was, sorry, mom, but you did. But so maybe the frogs were something
Why do you think they
strange.
made money green?
I don't know.
That's
English
for another time.
And in Islam, green is the color of sacredness, so I don't know if it
Well,
applies.
and I was gonna
across-
say, and green, like we need things to be green because that's growth. So it's interesting that the color has these sort of negative connotations, right? Of,
Yeah.
but also, you know, it's, wow, look how lush and green the hills are right now. It's interesting.
Too
why
long on
green-
frogs. Must move ahead.
Okay, method, okay.
28.
on.
Be here all day.
Green shoots.
The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace, your bedchamber, and your bed, the house of your courtiers and your people, and your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come upon you and on your people and on all your courtiers.
Okay, we're gonna see that part where it turns from frogs into one frog, but they probably will translate it as frogs, even though it's one frog. But if you're looking at the Hebrew at the Sfaradim, that's plural, and Sfardea. So you're gonna see this in verse 1 and 2. In verse 1, it's plural, but in verse 2, even though they translated it with an S, it is singular. Okay,
So, and Adonai said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers, the canals, and the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. And Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt. I'm looking for it in Hebrew. And then the frog, and the frog came up and covered the land of Egypt.
see, that's a big frog.
The frog came out.
Oh, it's Fardea, you said.
Yeah,
there it is,
so,
look at
and in the
that.
verse above, it's Hatzfardaim,
That's Fardea.
right?
Interesting.
It's plural there, but when he actually makes the frog, it's singular. They don't translate it as singular.
But the magician priests did the same with their spells and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt.
just-
I don't know, that just sort of seems self-defeating.
I was gonna say, why wouldn't they have then made the frogs disappear? Like if.
Yeah,
Yeah,
why
I-
make
you're gonna
more?
do
I
magic,
see your frog and raise you 10.
Yeah.
Because they're now they're gonna be
Because
really
now-
bad. They made it
Yeah.
worse.
Take that.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is this humility, the contrast of humility. You know, Moses is known for his humility, and the Egyptians are reacting, and Pharaoh is kind of exemplifying pridefulness and self-aggrandizement.
Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, plead with Adonai to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to God.
That's the first time Pharaoh has said, right?
Mhm.
Okay, I get that your God is doing this. Go and plead with God to stop it, and as a payment, I will let your people go
But he's
Well,
not saying go,
to
to
sacrifice.
go
Right,
sacrifice.
Yeah.
and that what's
And
Moses
that's all they
asking.
asked for.
Right, let my
Yeah.
people go so they can worship in the wilderness, which, you know, one could assume means they'll do their ritual thing and then they'll come back.
Right.
Whereas it's on to later where it becomes, we wanna take everything and everybody and go.
Yeah.
Interesting, okay. And Moses said to Pharaoh, you may have this triumph over me. For what time shall I plead in behalf of you and your courtiers and your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses to remain only in the Nile? For tomorrow, he replied, and Moses said, as you say, that you may know that there is no one like our God Adonai. The frog shall retreat from you, and your courtiers and your people, they shall remain only in the Nile.
Okay, I'm gonna ask if you would read, Barry, would you?
Sure. Then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to the Lord in the matter of the frogs which he had inflicted upon Pharaoh. And the Lord did as Moses asked. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. And they piled them up in heaps till the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, and it shall turn to lice throughout the land of Egypt.
So there's no talking to Pharaoh in between, right? We're going right from the frogs and Pharaoh's change of heart and going back on his word, and now he's just going to experience, the plagues are going to change and come faster.
And they did so. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust of the earth, and vermin came upon man and beast. All the dust of the earth turned to lice throughout the land of Egypt. The magicians did the like with their spells to produce lice, but they could not. The vermin remained upon man and beast.
So this is the first plague that the magicians were not able to reproduce. So that's a cause of fear as well.
And the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. And the Lord said to Moses, early in the morning, present yourself to Pharaoh, as he is coming out to the water, and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may worship me. For if you do not let my people go, I would let loose swarms of insects against you and your courtiers, and your people and your houses, the houses of the Egyptians, and the very ground they stand on shall be filled with swarms of insects. But on that day I shall set apart the region of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of insects shall be there. That you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land.
So it's the first time that that's been distinguished. This is a plague that will happen to the Egyptians, but not to the area of Goshen where the Israelites live. It's interesting to see that distinction.
And I will make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall come to pass. And the Lord did so. Heavy swarms of insects invaded Pharaoh's palace and the houses of his courtiers. Throughout the country of Egypt, the land was ruined because of the swarms of insects. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go and sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses replied, it would not be right to do this, for what we sacrifice to the Lord our God is untouchable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice that which is untouchable to the Egyptians before their very eyes, will they not stone us? So we must go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God, as he may command us.
So isn't that interesting? Now the request to leave and worship God is getting more precise, right? And it's getting more distance and taking more time, the going from Egypt.
Pharaoh said,
Can we go back to 15 for a second? I have a question about the anatomy here.
15.
The finger of God.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I mean, the magicians refer to the finger of God. And yet, God's already stated that he's going to free the Israelites with an outstretched arm. And other places we see the hand of God. Any thoughts about arms, hands, fingers? Why is it not more?
Well, I know the Haggadah goes into great depth about that, how many actual punishments there were, right? So I think that's part of it. That's where they.
The rabbis
that's where
are
the
seeing that
rabbis
too.
went.
Making a,
Yeah.
So the finger of God, one finger, which represents
lice.
the first plague that the magicians could not reproduce. So therefore, yes, 10 plagues,
And
but
10 fingers.
one finger.
per
Yeah,
plague.
and it goes on
Here.
and on and was like.
Yes,
And,
yes.
I had never really thought about it before. It's just,
could it
how
be,
much anatomy we have.
yeah, could
in
it be
this.
that the idea is that, look, if my finger can do this, wait till
Yeah.
you see what I can do with my entire
Yeah.
hand.
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah, I like that.
speculation.
When
And then at the same time, of course, we're not supposed to anthropomorphize.
anthropomorphize God,
Yeah.
here we are.
But here it is.
Yeah.
Earlier, when we heard about the outstretched arm, that was God speaking of God's self.
Mhm,
This is the magicians
mhm.
expressing how they're seeing.
How they perceive God,
particular-
yeah.
Would that be a negative thing?
Pardon?
Would that be a negative
I'm not
thing?
sure it's negative. I mean, God wants the Egyptians to recognize that the Israelite God is their God, is the one God,
Uh-huh.
is all, all powerful. And they're starting to see that in whatever way they're able to see it.
So this is all done with a rod.
Look, also like an extension of your finger.
And
like
if the
yod
Egyptians,
you
right,
use-
the Egyptians do anthropomorphize all their gods,
They do it, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, and they're the ones, so maybe they see this rod
as the finger.
as a finger of God.
Could be.
Well, I mean, it's not just the Egyptians, we anthropomorphize God
Mhm.
all the time.
Yes.
Because, it's the only imagery and it's the only language we have to consider God, even though we know God is formless and even, I mean, Maimonides used to warn against that all the time, whereas in his own writings, he used that same language. It just, I guess it's what we have to do with the language, we have no choice. But when we're thinking about God, we gotta be careful not to, old man with the beard on the throne sort of imagery.
With his finger out.
With his
making
finger
that,
out. His
right?
finger out.
Yeah. Sistine Chapel, yeah.
And it's interesting, sorry, Paul.
It's okay.
Back in the late 80s, early 90s, where in the reform movement, we started neutralizing God language in order to be more inclusive and to get away from male imagery. We started to see, particularly with young kids, that, it wasn't about is God male or female, but just like their language referring to God changed because they started to realize God doesn't have form. So when you're talking about, God as king or parent, Volcano, whatever, that promotes an image in our head. But when we use more nebulous language like God as creator or God as redeemer or something like that, we can't really picture that, but it does in a way better describe what God is doing for us or our experience of God. So it's fun, the relationship between language and imagery is so intimate.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
And
Because language is the only way we have to describe that's how we describe, ultimately, that's how we describe things.
Right.
We can have a picture of something, but in order to describe what that picture is, you have words that say, oh, this is a picture of clouds and a
Yeah,
house,
yeah.
right? I mean, we are creatures built for verbal communication, which is super imprecise.
It's inadequate, but it's
Yes.
all we have.
But it's all we
It's
have.
all we have.
Completely inadequate.
Like
and
that,
it's all-
that expression, a picture is worth 1,000
Thousand
words.
words.
Right, right.
It's true,
right.
it's true.
And again, I'm limited to understanding it through the English translations I have.
Right.
And I
Right.
don't know if the initial Hebrew would have evoked at
Right.
that time, those same images.
Yes.
And this is something off, I'm very interested in the fact that sort of just noting, or I kind of noted, thinking about it for a while, the nationhood of the Israelites and the Hebrews preceding really the notion of religion, that we started
Yes.
off as a people, as a tribe
Mm.
first, and then we acquired religion quite a bit afterwards. And I'm particularly struck by it right now because I'm on, unfortunately, I kind of got into it, a lot of feeds that are incredibly anti-Zionist, anti-Jew, anti-Israel. And it's one of the things that is always denied by the people on those feeds, is that there is no nationhood, no peoplehood, no tribal identity
Mhm.
to the Jew prior to religion, oftentimes our argument is, oh, just go be a religion amongst all the other, amongst all the other nations, and having to come back and say, but we also want to be a nation.
Well, we
amongst
are, it's not that we
nations.
want
Yeah,
to, right?
well,
We
yeah,
are,
exactly.
we are not just a
It's
religion.
very hard when I find to talk about
Mhm.
on these different feeds and posts.
It's interesting. Wow.
No, you're right.
Barry, would you continue?
Yep, for sure.
Sorry, so I just pointed out on the bottom of 439, there's a footnote number 3. About hands and fingers.
Mhm.
The hands of the Lord will strike the whole, and not just the finger.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then you're going to get more
Oh,
severe.
interesting.
you
And then talk to the, and then talk to the hands.
Yeah.
Back to the hand.
Or,
Well, it must be a negative thing, because, when kids say, I'm gonna give them the finger.
Oh, there's that.
That's
God
not a
was giving them
positive,
the
that's not a positive thing.
Right.
Very good.
I think also with the counting of 10 is interesting historically, it surfaces relatively around the same time period that people started counting in base 10 as opposed to like base 12,
10,
which
20.
preceded it in ancient Samaria. So this is kind of codifying, we're doing 10 now. 10 plagues, we have 10 commandments, we're
Oh,
doing 10
interesting.
things from now on.
I
heard somewhere, getting back to the image thing, where it's hard to describe that. I remember watching on YouTube one of the rabbis speak, and I believe he mentioned that Moses was on such a high level that he wasn't able to verbalize well, and that's the reason why he needed Aaron to actually be the prophet for him. So,
That's an interesting spin on
which is actually the way where God's mind is at such a high level that he needs a prophet to do his bidding, so to
And
speak.
Moses' relationship with God was so unique and in a way nonverbal.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
face to face.
Just what God spoke to Moses non-verbally, I guess, right?
But didn't he tell God he was doing something wrong one time? Or something like that?
Moses told God that God was doing something.
Yeah, and to stop it.
A few times.
Yeah, okay.
They won't think you're a good God anymore.
Stop that.
Yeah.
I think he was killing too many people or something.
Barry, let's continue and see if we can get a few more verses in.
Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but do not go very far. Plead then for me.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right?
Pharaoh's asking you, put in a good word for me, because your God's something.
And Moses said, when I leave your presence, I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of insects depart tomorrow from Pharaoh and his courtiers and his people. But let not Pharaoh again act deceitfully, not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord, and the Lord did as Moses asked. He removed the swarms of insects from Pharaoh, from his courtiers, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh became stubborn this time also and would not let the people go. The Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go to worship me. For if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, then the hand of the Lord will strike your livestock in the fields, the horses, the asses, the camels, the cattle, and the sheep, with a very severe pestilence. For the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of the Egyptians, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the Israelites. The Lord has fixed the time tomorrow. The Lord will do this thing in the land. And the Lord did so the next day. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but of the livestock of the Israelites, not a beast died.
So now we're seeing life and death in an instant, right? Getting more and more critical, more and more severe, more and more shocking.
The Israelites were slaves. How did they have livestock?
They were originally sheep herders, remember?
Right, I know originally they were sheep herders, but at this point, they're slaves. So how is it that they still have livestock?
Biblically, there's different categories of slaves.
Okay.
And, one of those categories was what you might call absolute slavery, where you couldn't own your own property, that your children belonged to, and your owner had the power of life and death over you. The less severe category. What we might refer to historically as indentured servitude is, you have to work and you're under the power of
Auspices.
the slave owners, but you have your own house, you have your own children, you have your own, and you can have your own flocks and you can farm your own land and stuff like that. I mean, where people found the time to do that, besides the point, but apparently here, as Paula said, from the time of Joseph, they were sheep herders.
We have come to 12 o'clock, my friends.
Can I ask one all-encompassing question? And Rabbi, you'll probably be answering this. What is the commonly held belief when we need God more than anything now? Why has he in the past, I don't know how many centuries, stopped doing visible miracles? Like we don't see any Red Seas parting or even Lake Muskoka, why don't we ever see the power of God's handiwork? Why doesn't somebody be walking down the street disabled and all of a sudden, a lightning burst out and they can get out of their wheelchair? Like,
You're not going to the right
You ask a
churches.
huge question. It's a great line, and I forget who saw it, said it. It wasn't Heschel, but it was some other biblical scholar. That Jews believe in miracles, but we don't rely on them. And I think that's really important. But you also see, we're reading Exodus story here. And, spiritually, the Israelites were infants. And so they needed, when you're a baby or young child, your parents have to be there to hold your hand and to dress you and to wipe your tushy and to feed you and everything.
well, I can understand them not
Later
happening.
on, they didn't need God in quite the same way, so we get through the period of.
I can see not happening on a daily basis, but every once in a while, don't you think it'd be a good sort of shock of remembrance that, hey, I'm really here,
You know what, miracles happen every day all around us. We
may not
recognize them. Every time somebody who's severely ill gets better as a miracle. It's, I really, like I said, we believe in miracles, we just don't rely on them, and
they're just not as dramatic now.
they're just not, because God is, through the prophetic period, God spoke through the prophets, and then once we entered the rabbinic period of what's called divine inspiration, we're not dealing with God anymore. We're dealing with stories of it. And our relationship with God is defined by our relationship with the text, not by, and our experiences of God, personal experience of God, have to be much more subtle. And I know from my own recent experience, it's really easy to say, why is God letting this happen to me? But that removes the focus of responsibility for us to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other and just expect that God's gonna point the finger.
My Christian friends say, God doesn't do bad things to us. He gives us the will, and it's our decision as to how we want to execute them.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
maybe
it's
there's
easier
that.
in Christianity because they've got God and the devil. And everything good is God and everything bad is the devil. We don't have that.
But he gives
in our
us
faith.
free will, so maybe we
Yep.
do things that cause us to think that God isn't there by our own design.
Well,
I
and
don't-
that's the Josh from last night, right?
Right.
The
It's
two,
alright.
the two sides that everybody has, that, right?
How you're taught, how your community
How you taught
reinforces
nature,
what is right and
nature,
different.
nurture, right?
Excellent.
It's an important question you asked.
It
but
is an
it's,
important question. Last night
Maybe what's-
we did the blessing for coming through a miracle, right?
For Victoria.
Victoria said that your Katz had Gomel blessing because she had an accident that completely totaled her car, that she walked away from.
Really?
Yeah, and she
She was there last night.
when she talks about it, she says, I really felt God's presence there.
And keep in mind, reading what we're reading today, plagues and miracles are exactly the same thing. They are acts of God that go against the normative natural cycle of things. You know, if it's in your favor, it's a miracle. If it's against you, it's a plague, but it's the exact same thing.
Right, right.
Trump is a good example.
Yeah.
Where he goes.
Some people think he's a miracle, some people think he's a plague.
I want to say Shabbat Shalom to all our friends online today. Shabbat Shalom.
I'm gonna make I'm gonna make a small circles plug for our TAS hikers.
Yeah, TAS hikers.
TAS hikers, we're hiking again next week. Usually it's every other week right after Torah study. They're fun hikes, they're not hard hikes. It's super fun, a groupie people. And if you're interested, come see me and I'll get you into our WhatsApp group because that's where we post all the information of what the hike, when it is, what it is, how long it is, how hard it is. And all of that fun stuff. It's super fun.
If you want to, you have a small circle too,
I would like to
Yes.
add to that, we have a small circle.
Marsha.
We had 5 people participate last week. We have a list of plays, a myriad number of
This
plays
is a theater going group.
to which we are going to the theater. So if you'd like to go to the theater in a group, it was great. We came back to my house after and rehashed everything and
What'd you see?
You did your own critique.
we all did our own critiques and it was wonderful. It puts you right in the moment when you're in
Lovely.
theater.
What
So
did you see?
if you're
Marsha?
interested,
Mhm.
please call Marcia. My cell is 905-541-6114, and I can rhyme off the enormous list of theatrical productions to which we are
All
visiting.
right.
What did you
What
see
did you
last
see?
week?
We saw, well, we went because
Kiss
of
Me, Kate.
Diane Sandler.
Okay,
She was the love interest in Kiss Me, Kate.
okay.
And Kiss Me, Kate's lover was maybe 60, but the star of the show, who was absolutely dynamite, was probably in his 70s, which was hilarious. But
Love that.
everyone in the performance had to be over 55.
Right.
So
Love that.
Diane was playing a young, fetching young woman. And she has back problems and she had 6 changes of clothes.
Oh.
And she said before every performance, she had to take 3 extra strength Advils.
Oh, boy.
To
She was-
get through it.
Well, she was changing outfits
Good
and
for her.
yeah.
Where was that?
It was at the large Ancaster Memorial Theater, not the little intimate one, the big one.
Lancaster Memorial.
It was fantastic and she was great. And this is the second time in her life that she has ever acted. She's been
Wow.
a singer her whole life, but she acted when we saw her last year as the young fetching 18-year-old in Kiss Me in Oklahoma. And she was even greater this year. She
Oh,
was,
that's great.
so we felt we should support her because she's, a Temple member. And
Yeah.
but the play
wonderful.
turned out to be terrific.
I'm glad you had such a good
That's
time.
great.
Anybody else that has a special hobby or interest and is interested in starting a small circle? Gathering a group of people together around your interests, we welcome that. It's a lovely way to build community. So thank you so
Sounds
much.
good.
Thank you so much to everyone who came to see us
Shabbat
online
shalom.
today. We have a
Shabbat
full
shalom,
table here
Anshe.
in the library. which we
Shabbat
love.
Shalom.
Good day.
Shalom.